Hey guys, welcome to another episode at bringspark.com. Today I have a guest with me who's got a very interesting field of expertise, at least I think so. She is a published author, she's a human behavior researcher, she's a professional people watcher basically, which is something that I've been doing since I was a kid, and I'm sure you have too. She's been on USA Today, The Today Show, she's been Wall Street Journal, she's worked with CNN, with Forbes, the list just goes on, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about her work and her insight into human behavior, and I can't wait to get started, so I'm not going to talk anymore and just turn it over to Vanessa Van Edwards. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome. Now, just so that people kind of know what you're about and what your background is, could you give us a short, what's your story? What's your background?
Yeah, so I run a human behavior research lab and I live in Portland, Oregon. And we basically try to figure out the hidden forces that drive our behavior. So I'm constantly looking for puzzles or patterns in what makes people tick.
That's very cool. Now that must be a neat party trick at times. I'm sure being able to read people the way that you obviously can. I mean, how does this knowledge influence someone in their personal life? If they know these skills, if they learn more about them, because obviously, I can see the use for it in professional life, in hiring employees or doing interviews or whatever. But for the people watching who just want to, get ahead in their personal life, whether it's socially or in relationships or at work, why is this useful for them to know?
Yeah, so I think that for me, I'm a recovering awkward person. So yeah, people skills did not come naturally to me. And so I think that the way that I approach it is like kind of finding an inner superpower where, life was fine before people skills. It was okay, but everything was harder.
Mm.
Interviews were harder, conversations were harder, elevator pitches were harder, dates were horribly hard.
Been there.
Yeah, and so everything was just a little bit like clunkier. And so what I figured out is that when I started learning people skills as more of a science as opposed to, kind of an extra soft skill, have a good handshake, whatever. When I started to actually study it like it was a language or a tool, everything became smoother. I joke that people skills is the lubricant of social interactions. That
Yeah.
it just makes everything go a little bit smoother. And that is really what happens is everything just gets a little bit easier. You feel like conversations become easier, negotiations become easier, flirting becomes easier. And that I think is a huge relief. If you're also a recovering awkward person, it's a huge relief.
Absolutely. And I get the feeling. I mean, I work with communication. I teach communication to people. And even the people that show up at my trainings who seem confident and seem outgoing and seem like they kind of have things under control, they have that insecurity in their mind, that little voice in the back of their head. They're not always necessarily, but often they're in situations where they feel kind of awkward. They don't know what to do. They just kind of try stuff, and it might work, it might not, but they're really not as confident as they want to be. What's your experience with people?
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you talk about sort of people kind of just try stuff, I think there's two different kinds of responses to discomfort. So if you walk into a conference or a meeting and you have that voice in the back of your head, and to be honest, most people do. I mean, over 90% of people have some sort of either little insecurity like, gosh, I hope I'm prepared for this, or major insecurities like imposter syndrome or very, very low self-worth. So whether or not they're big or small, you have two reactions. Either people come in and they're just trying things, right? They make a really awkward joke here. They kind of, fumble through a conversation there. They're just throwing it all at the wall and hoping that something will stick. The other reaction is when you see people who are like super scripted.
Mm.
So like they try to control their anxiety. So they are super anxious. So they memorize a whole bunch of conversation starters, stories, and try to control the entire flow of a conversation.
Yeah.
They almost look like they're performing for you. Like, they come in and they're like, so nice to meet you. My name is Vanessa. So tell me about, and they like, and you're like,
the dancing monkey routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that it's either way. And both of them are the same fundamental kernel of nervousness, but we do different things as humans. So I think it's important for people listening, think about, with no judgment, which one do you fall into?
Mm.
Do you try to control your anxiety, or do you sort of flounder in it and pray that it doesn't consume you?
Right.
Because that's very helpful to know which way you go.
I can imagine. Now, what's the difference between the people that you're talking about now and that remaining 10%, the people who don't really have that issue? What's the big difference between these two people?
Yeah, so charisma is learned. There are a few people who are born with it. So you can learn charisma, but there are those people who just, they walk into a room and they feel like they belong, right? And typically, by the way, that those 10% don't feel that way in every area of their life. So they might feel totally confident and charismatic in the business world, but they're not as good necessarily at home or with their children and their relationships or with friends and family. So what I think happens is that we tend to, that's how you get workaholics, right? People who are workaholics, it's because they feel incredibly capable at work. They feel incredibly powerful. And by the way, I think capability is the most undervalued emotion, more than awe or gratitude or even empathy. When we feel capable, like when we feel really good at something, I think it's addictive. And so I think that 10% are those people who, whatever environment they're in, they feel like their best selves in that environment.
Hmm.
So it usually doesn't bleed over to every area of life. I mean, how many people have you met where they're a shark in the boardroom, but have a horrible marriage
Right.
or whatever?
Exactly.
So that happens a lot, I think.
That it does. It has happened a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So how can people get to that, or is it possible to get to that point if you're already nervous and maybe even socially anxious? How can you get to the point where you're just comfortable?
Yeah, so it's not an easy answer. If it was an easy answer, then we wouldn't, I think, have all these websites and resources on people skills. But I do think there's a really easy place to start.
Hmm.
And this is the place that I myself started. So hopefully this helps people who are watching. I used to think that if you wanted to be successful with people, you A, had to be an extrovert, and B, you always had to be on, right? Like you had to be an expert with people and have people skills everywhere you went. From the grocery store, you had to be able to make friends with the checkout person, to a party, you had to be like the life of the party, to a board meeting, you had to win the negotiation. And that is just not the case. And anyone who tells you that you have to be on all the time or be charismatic all the time, it just isn't realistic. So what I would say is find your places that are nourishing to you and that are toxic to you. And those are really extreme words, and I know that because it's a spectrum. But there are places I'm sure you can think of where you feel like your best self. That could be on one-on-one coffee meetings.
Hmm.
That could be on Skype interviews. That could be, with friends. That could be wherever that is. Make a list of the places where you feel like you are your best self and try to find commonalities or patterns between those places. On the other end of the spectrum, you try to think of the places where you feel like that little nagging feeling of fear is like overwhelming,
Hmm.
right? You feel out of your comfort zone, like you don't belong, like you are just your worst self. And try to look for the patterns in that. For me, I really don't do well in like nightclubs. Oh my gosh, like even like loud bars,
Right.
music concerts are, I'm really out of my comfort zone in those areas. And that's weird because a lot of my friends, those are like their favorite places. Whereas I love like learning environments like conferences, networking events, workshops, seminars. I just love it. And I realized that the difference is for me, I'm an ambivert. So I'm a little bit introvert and a little bit extrovert. And my favorite way to have charisma, my brand of charisma is like deep and meaningful conversations, asking people really personal questions about themselves, maybe
Right.
even too personal. And in nightclubs, bars, and concerts, it's too loud to talk. So I end up like screaming over the music. So, what's your
Yeah,
story?
I think we've all been there. It doesn't really work.
Yeah. And for some people, they thrive in that environment because if someone's like, no, I'm much more quiet, I like to observe. They love nightclubs, loud bars, and concerts because they can hang out on the side, kind of nod to people, say, hey, what's up, and listen to the music and occasionally clink glasses. And they are like, that is their brand of charisma. So I think it's really important to not try to be on all the time and figure out your places.
That sounds like very good advice. You've mentioned charisma a lot, and I'm sure everyone has an idea of what charisma is, but I happen to know that you have some insights into charisma, and actually, you can actually explain it to people in words that aren't as abstract. So I'd love
Sure.
it if we could go there for just a minute and have you talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I love talking about charisma. You're right. So we kind of have this general idea of charisma, like it's like magnetism and coolness or something, but there's actually a science to charisma that I think is really interesting. So when you talk about charisma, it is the perfect blend of warmth and competence. And you have to have the perfect blend of these two things. So for example, if you have someone who's just warm, they're friendly, they're sweet, but they're kind of a pushover, they're kind of passive, you don't really take them very seriously. If you have someone who's just competent and not warm, they're very intelligent, they're very powerful and credible, but they're not approachable or engaging or friendly. So the people who are the most charismatic, what they have is this amazing blend of approachability and credibility, that warmth and competence together. And that works in every scenario, right?
Mm.
You want a perfect partner, like when you're online dating, you want a partner who is both friendly and warm, but also smart and good to talk to.
Right.
In a business situation, you want a colleague who is fun to hang out with at drinks after work, but also going to help you get that project done. So that's why charisma it's sort of this universal blanket term of this magic quality that people have, but it's actually quite specific.
That sounds brilliant. And what is, I mean, both warmth and confidence are huge topics, obviously,
Yeah.
and we could explore that in depth. But for a lot of people, I know, especially a lot of guys, a lot of confident guys who doesn't have that warmth, they when I talk to them at least, a lot of them are like, well, warmth, that means I have to be like a pushover, I have to be like,
Right.
a softie or
Right.
or R-rated words than that. What is warmth and what is confidence?
Yeah. So it's actually competence, not confidence.
Oh,
Competence, which is
sorry.
no, like I'm so glad you said that because they're so closely tied that they could almost be the same word in a certain sense. So they're very, very closely tied. But yes. So the reason why men are right when they say, I don't want to be warm because I don't want to be seen as like a pushover or any other P word that you might think of. And that's right. That is because if you are too warm, you're seen as that. It is a spectrum. So when we talk about warmth blended with competence, what that doesn't have to be saying yes to everything. That doesn't have to be not having opinions. That means being authentic in what you actually know about. So for example, when you're on a date, let's use the dating scenario specifically, a really warm person who's not competent will be like, uh-huh, oh yeah, I totally agree with everything the other person says, right? They're just agreeable.
Hmm.
That is not an ideal mate. And a lot of people get that wrong. A lot of women get that wrong. They think they have to be really super agreeable with everything. Yes. Oh yeah, I love dogs. I love travel. I love doing that. Uh-huh. Yeah, whatever you think, whatever you want, right? Like, and so that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And then when you add in the competence, what that means is you are able to find, I call this the like radar. You find topics that you really like. Like the conversation is actually just one giant radar of topics that you feel really good talking about
Mm.
and that they feel really good talking about. So competence doesn't have to mean that you're spewing off facts about everything. And that is something that a lot of really highly competent people get wrong, is someone will say, oh, I really want to go to, China. And they go, well, let me tell you about China. So their GDP is this, and they have a population of over this many people, and
Right.
and they spew into that. A better way to do that, a warm and competent way or a charismatic way would be, oh wow, so what made you decide you wanted to go to China? I've been to China once and I found like the most fascinating thing was, what are you excited to talk about or see? So it's a very different, it's not a know-it-all, and it's not just being agreeable to be agreeable. It's finding topics that you genuinely know about and genuinely like,
Mm.
and being very transparent with that. I think that for the most part, if you don't know about something or you don't even really like something, people will respect you more if you're like, man, I never really thought about it that way before.
Absolutely.
That's like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, a friend of mine who works on dating and relationships and stuff like that, he says that when people say just be yourself, it's actually the best advice ever if you understand what people are saying. And what they're saying is don't try to pretend like you're something that you're not.
Yeah.
And one of the main points he makes is what you just said is, don't try to pretend like you know something about a topic if you don't try to placate people by agreeing with everything. Yeah, I love hiking, and the last time
Yeah.
you went hiking was 10 years ago,
Yeah.
because that's not being yourself, and you won't be neither warm nor competent, I'm sure.
There's something that's called the Franklin effect, which is a really nice way to blend both warmth and competence in a unique way. So the Franklin effect was named after Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin wrote about this in his autobiography, where he said he found that if you ask someone for a favor, they often end up liking you more. Now, this is very counterintuitive. Usually you would think, if you give a favor, that person would like you more. But
Right.
actually, it's the person who asked the favor. And so he figured this out by asking his enemy if he could borrow a book, borrowed the book, returned the book, said he loved the book. And the enemy started liking Franklin and was like,
Mhm.
yeah, we're going to be good guys together. And so I actually, when I learned this, I was excited by it because I think that the best way to utilize the Franklin effect is either A, topics that you don't know about. So if someone brings up a topic that you don't know about, instead of either changing the conversation awkwardly or pretending that you know about it, saying, wow, I would love to learn more about that. I have no idea. I'm so sorry. I have no idea what's going on with the fiscal policy in the U.S. right now, or whatever it is that they bring up.
Right.
Could you catch me up for a little bit?
Mhm.
That actually is a modified version of the Franklin effect. It is very competent because you know your limits, right? Competent people know what they don't know. It's
Absolutely.
also very warm because you're asking for help.
Yeah, and it seems to me like you're playing all the right angles on that, because not only are you being warm and approachable and you're saying I'm not perfect, I know nothing about this, but you're also showing that you're secure enough in yourself and your own competence to actually admit when you don't know anything and to actually learn from the other person, which is also including them in the conversations. That sounds like a perfect recipe for charisma to me.
Yeah, and if you're worried about things to talk about, like if you're approaching a networking event or a party or a date and you're like, oh my God, like what am I going to talk about? I think that thinking of things that you need advice about is actually one of the best things to talk about. So instead of coming up with, I'm going to bring up that funny stand-up routine and then try to repeat it, or like I'm going to talk about the news, whatever it is that's okay. Those are all fine. But I actually think it's like, what's going on in my life that I could really use either a female's opinion or a friend's opinion, and saying to them in the middle of the conversation, this is if you're getting that lag, how conversations will sometimes like, people are like,
Yep.
so
You hit that
that
awkward
moment,
moment.
right? So that is the perfect moment to say, hey, I know this is crazy, but I would love your advice on something. And people like watch their face when you say that to them. And you have to, by the way, genuinely want advice from this person. Okay, don't do it just to
Obviously.
do it.
Mm.
And I always need a lot of advice. So people are like, oh yeah, yes, and they like straighten up and they lean into you and they like to put on like their like importance hat, and they get really excited. And then you have this great conversation where you can explain something that's going on for you, and they can sort of brainstorm with you. And it's the ultimate Franklin effect, but also like partnership.
Mm.
You literally go into like mind meld together. When you're trying to solve a problem of any kind together, they are able to actually get into it with you. It's the difference between like this kind of conversation and finally you just do this.
Yeah,
And so I
absolutely.
love thinking about that before I walk into networking events, before I walk into meetings, or even seeing friends. That's usually what I'm brainstorming before I walk in.
That's perfect. Yeah, I talk about that too when I teach, and from a slightly different angle, but I'm talking about the exact same thing. I call it the bubble effect, because you're creating a bubble around you and that other person, and it's something between the two of you. So even in a room with 100 other people, they don't have that connection, and you and the other person have internal jokes or internal stories or
Mhm.
something that connects you in a way that the other people can't participate in. So
Yeah.
that's a great way to do it. Now, for the people that are, heavy on the warmth scale and
Mhm.
not on the competency scale, and want to be more charismatic, but they're feeling, they don't have that security in themselves. They don't really know how to do it because they've been the nice guy or good girl all their lives. Uh,
Mhm.
what can they do to kind of practice, stepping out of that role and into that sweet spot in the middle?
Yeah, I would highly recommend rejection therapy. So people
That
who
sounds
are
like fun.
highly, oh, it's horrible, and really fun. If that doesn't sell it, I don't know what will. Whenever I have students who are yes people, who have learned appeasement from a young age, so constantly, bowing to other people's requests and afraid to put their requests or asks or needs first, and either are afraid to share an opinion or feel that they don't actually have a worthwhile opinion. I basically make them do rejection therapy. So rejection therapy is when you set out to do things that you know you will get rejections from. So you actually force yourself into an ask and a failure, like and a no. because you can get immunized against that feeling. The reason why people will stay in high warmth is not because they're boring. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're not competent. It's because they're typically afraid. They're afraid to share their opinions because if they share their opinions and that opinion is rejected, they're going to feel stupid. So it's totally from a fear place. And the good news is that you can inoculate yourself against fear.
Right.
You just have to get out there and do it in a safe space. So obviously it's much more terrifying to go to a networking event or talk to a business colleague, share an opinion, and have them be like, shh, no, because they're a business colleague, right? You know them permanently. But if you do rejection therapy with people that you would never know and you would never meet, they're never going to see you again. So you know that there's no long-term downside. In fact, there's only long-term benefits because you get that sting of embarrassment and fear out of the way. So I would recommend choosing a meetup in your town or in your city with a topic that you know absolutely nothing about. I mean, it has to be like you know nothing about it, like knitting or, curling or like some topic that you really have barely ever seen before. Show up and you know nothing, right? So you literally have no competence. You don't have any opinions on the topic. And all I want you to do is be asking people what and how questions.
Right.
What is this? What is that? How would I do this? How would I do that? Because then all you're doing is learning things, asking a ton of questions, and you really very quickly get used to the fact that you're not going to be able to have a wrong answer. And if you do, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So I would start with that, and you can level that up. That's like a baby step. The next step would be then to go to a meetup and have a request of some kind. So that means you're asking for something.
Okay.
And then hoping that people will say yes or no. So it could be as simple as, hey, I'm starting a newsletter. Would you like to join it? It could be, hey, I'm looking for more people who might be good for my vacuum cleaner business. Do you know anyone who needs a vacuum cleaner?
Right.
It can be real or fake, whatever you want. I prefer real, just I think that's a little bit easier. And that's when you start to hear no's. And the first no is going to suck. Like it's going to suck. Like you're going to like sweat and feel like you're going to throw up. And like that's totally normal. That means you're doing it right. The second and third no will be, okay, this is not great. And then the last few no's, you'll be like, yep, meh.
That's great.
And that really helps.
I can only imagine. I mean, just getting used to that or getting over that fear of the rejection that ultimately never means anything if you get rejected. People just think that it does. It's got to raise both your warmth because you're more willing to be vulnerable later on,
Right.
and your competency because you're willing to admit when you don't know anything because it's not a big deal at all. So that
Right.
sounds like the perfect way to get into, the realm of charisma for those who want to explore that more.
And it's a great conversation starter later. So I do it myself like regularly. I take vows of silence, which is also horrible, and I do rejection therapy. And they're great conversation starters. So
Yeah.
if anything, do it for one night, and you will have conversations for the next 5 years.
I do something we call the absurd request, where we go into a store and we ask the people who work in the store for something that they obviously don't sell there. So you might
Yes.
go to a clothing store and ask for a cheeseburger or whatever it is, and you got to do it plain face. You got to do it like you're being serious, and it's just
Yeah.
so much fun because people in the beginning, the first few times they do it, they're all nervous, and then it turns into a game, and then it's just fun because they realize that actually doing something that makes absolutely no sense with another human being is not a big deal. It's just
Okay.
kind of, and that makes them more comfortable having real conversations because that might actually lead to a productive result. So
Agreed.
it sounds like a lot of the same kind of stuff. Now, obviously, you've studied this for years. You know this very well, and it comes natural to you now. But for those watching this, in addition to what we've been talking about now, where should they go to see more of your work or more of, get more information about this so that they can get better at it?
Yes, and you can get better at it. If you're watching this and there was something that I said that you were like, oh, that terrifies me, like that's good. That's exactly the way it should be. And I still do stuff that terrifies me all the time. So everything, all my case studies and all the tips and tricks, all of our experiments are at thescienceofpeople.com. And on there, I have everything that's free. All my videos are free. All our articles are free because I really think this should be taught in schools. I think that everyone should know people skills. I think it's our right to know how to connect and communicate with people. So the more that I can give it out, the better.
Yeah, that's actually our long-term goal with bringspark.com is to take all the money that we make from it and put it towards programs for schools on things like this, on social skills, on connection. Because that's, I mean, I have a master's degree in education myself, and my big problem with any Western educational system that I run into is
Yeah.
basically nobody teaches this stuff, and it's something that everyone should know from when they're kids. But as you said, everyone can learn, and it doesn't matter how old you are. You could be, 12 or 100, and you can still
That's
improve
right.
your social.
That's right.
That's perfect. Is there anything you want to leave our viewers with? Something that they can, something they can go out and just start doing to improve their social skills, or the way they read people, or the way they connect with people?
I would say stop asking people what they do, and start asking people if they're working on any personal passions. That's one conversation starter that will really help you make deeper connections faster.
Absolutely. Talking about people's passions and their love for what they do is a lot better than talking about how many hours a week they spend at the office.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we won't keep you any longer. I love this talk, and I'm sure our viewers will too. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And we're going to put the link to your website up under this video for anyone watching. Go check it out. I've been through the whole site myself, and I really love what I've seen on there. So it's worth checking out. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.